across the Obeya concept. And this talk is going to be largely about where that came from and how I've learned to use it and adapt to different environments. And it's a very, very fluid and organic mechanism for doing that. So the basic Obeya concept is really, really simple. It's about having a way for people to collaborate, to visually monitor their performance in an easy to understand way. And it needs to be able to be adapted as it needs to be done. I use the SQCDP chart as a pillar, but it doesn't have to be that. I'm also going to illustrate, where the Obeya, how it works and who it benefits, and then outline some opportunities that our post-COVID world is going to bring the Obeya principles into people's home, onto their laptop screens. People work in a remote way, but still maintain that important team ethos and collaboration. Know that the English translation of Obeya is simply large room, which it isn't a direct translation, but it's about getting relevant stuff in one place. And what I've learned is that there's effectively 5 core pillars that make any Obeya, large or small, work. So the purpose is to formalize data collection, because without data, we can't measure our activities and we can't move forward and we can't adapt as an organization. To put that information in a central place. And the reason for centralizing it is that people know where to go, and it prevents hidden data, which is a huge danger for most organizations. We visualize it to make it easy to interpret, and some organizations keep that secret. Over the years, I've learned that being transparent is actually a very positive experience for most customers, but also new starters to the organization. And it just builds that one team mentality. And then the other part is encouraging interaction. So as Jelmer indicated earlier, every objective needs to have a series of actions. But more importantly is going back to the 8 Ds within Lean, and one of them is reducing wasted movement. The time it takes for people to go from place to place, that is non-productive time, and meetings are always seen as a non-productive activity. Okay, as you can see here, there's here's a picture of an Obeya that's close to the workplace, but where it came from was actually on the Toyota Prius development, which was a project environment. So that was a design project with participants across a big global corporation. And what that enabled was quick and effective decision making that was fluid and organic and manageable by the participants actually in the workspace. It helped to reduce defects because each team and sub-team could adapt very organically, and obviously reduced unnecessary rework and movement of people and materials. But the biggest advantage was it reduced unnecessary decisions. A lot of the time when you have a data-heavy environment, there's a tendency to want to measure everything. And if you measure everything, then you need to make a decision about everything, even if that decision is to not do something about it. Okay, and what the Obeya concept did was actually highlighted that there's a lot of information that's influencing non-productive decisions, and that causes politics and conflict, and is actually counterproductive in a collaborative environment. So what that's, in a nutshell, the Obeya principle is about making your objectives visible, similar to OKR, but it's taking it down a level from that high level objective down to shop floor actions. And the unwritten rule, it's about empowerment. So empowerment is at a team level, effectively
Roy, sorry, can I interrupt you just a second before you continue on? There is a comment here that you may want to address either now or you can pick it up later, is that from a lean perspective, the order of the letters should be SQ, not SQDCP, but it should, sorry, I've read it the wrong way. Rather than SQCDP, it should be SQDCP. I don't know whether you want to address that now or you want to do that later in the presentation.
Well, I think it's semantics. So I can address it now. So the reason that I've oriented mine this way, and it doesn't, I think it's very easy to become dogmatic when it comes to lean. So safety, I think, is an overriding point. So it's emphasizing the priority that it holds in the organization. Quality is, again, this is from a principled perspective, is putting that emphasis that quality is a primary element within the organization's perspective. But it doesn't have to be like that. Costs, delivery, and productivity, or people, but these columns, they don't have to be called that. So some of the examples that I'll go through later, safety isn't a concern, but morale is. So that becomes a column, that becomes a pillar. Okay, but so I would prefer, right now we're talking about the principle of it and the fact that it's adaptable. I think it's very easy to follow, the Toyota, be a Toyota fundamentalist, and that's not always the way that works for every organization. It certainly worked for Toyota, but remember, it took them nearly 40 years to get there. But there are other organizations, just have 3, because the other parts don't need to be measured. But thanks for that point. Hopefully I'm not sticking to a strict Toyota format here. Okay, so I narrow the Obeya down to the foundation is the 3 T's. Time, team, and task. That's have a set time to have your productivity overview. Set the team. It doesn't always have to be the same people, but it needs to be relevant to the people that the Obeya is obviously helping. And there should always be some kind of outcome. There should always be a task, an action. And even if that action is to delay or to not do anything right now, and that action also could be, we need to find something else to measure because this that we're looking at is stable. But the most important aspect is having a standardized format. So you know, the standardized format is just having an arrangement that has a common thread throughout the organization. And I've certainly found that the standardized format is, from a visual perspective, is looking at trends. So if overall, if up is good or green is good, then have that as a common trend, and keep those categories relevant. Because as soon as something becomes irrelevant, the data becomes stale, and then basically people start to switch off. Update it and adapt it, but ultimately, all of those categories should have data-driven actions. You should be able to identify when you've done something, whether it's moving in the right direction, and that there's about not only good leadership, but it's also about encouraging the team to collaborate. And that there's the whole purpose behind visual management, as you know. So, here's just a bigger version, and thank you very much to Agile Walls and Bart for sharing this. This is a standard template, but it doesn't. Each organization's Obeya doesn't have to follow these, this exact format, but these columns are the structure. They're showing what is important and encouraging the team to have almost a uniform for how they present their information. Okay, who it helps? Any lean practitioner knows that lean on the whole benefits the whole organization, from organizational objectives at the executive level, right down through team management, team members, but it also encourages the relationship between internal and external suppliers. And that's even more important now as we come out of our post-COVID period, where supply chains are extremely pressurized. And there's a lot of unknowns that we have to allow for, which previously we could probably have planned for. And then the other aspect is the customers. In most manufacturing environments, the customers can be a pretty unpredictable element. But as we go towards remote working as a preference, and as global impacts affect the organization, then the customer's demands can be more pressurized and more unpredictable. So it's important to follow the underlying principle of simple things done consistently and well is what makes a success. And that there means interacting team to team, team members to team members, and then across to suppliers as well. Okay, so one thing that's on every business leader's mind at the moment is how they're going to deal with the re-emergence from the COVID pandemic. How are they going to encourage their teams to interact? And more importantly, how they're going to adapt to a whole list of unknowns, which people thought they could predict before the pandemic, but they all now have a big question mark over them. And the key element here is, obviously restarting, re-engaging with customers, but managing economic risks in a different way. And this could be supply chain oriented, It could be the human factors as well. Business resilience, it has moved to the top of pretty much every business's planning agenda. And one element within that is good communication. And also dealing with regionality. But regionality is also, it's seen as a problem under some older, previous mindset, but it's also now seen as a huge opportunity. And as we're doing here, the regionality element really shines through on this format. And this boils down to effective communication, focused, simple, and relevant metrics. And that's where the Obeya concept really shines through. Companies like iObeya have done that in the digital platform. I work with remote teams across different regions, so you'll hear me refer to pain through the pen. It's a little bit old school, but it helps them really focus on what's important because it's not automated, and it discourages that that tendency to want to record everything, which, as Jelmer highlighted earlier, that this is a big problem. So going forward, as we are here, we're on Zoom. This is no different to a small team gathering in an office. And, how many thumbnails can you fit on your screen is really how big your Obeya can be. The bigger the team, the bigger the number of participants, then the actual what you're measuring actually becomes much more difficult, because it's actually important to narrow that focus right down so that people are working towards principled objectives and at a team level managing their inputs and the trends towards success, rather than trying to share everything with everybody. In the digital format, in the online format, it's also very important to have structure, and the Obeya the Obeya principle fits with that, because there's a set way of walking through the data sets, and basically there are no limits to what we want to do. So TPS, as I said, has been working remotely for more than 10 years. And we've got customers and clients in a number of geographic locations with different cultures and different elements of importance. So it's important to, when you're establishing an Obeya, to understand that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all for everybody. And it can be used in different settings, but having these guiding principles just helps people think in the right way. And as I said earlier, it creates a more of a data collection uniform for an organization. So this example here is one which I've just come off the back of this for a project in the US. And you use the Obeya template from a planning perspective to bring collaborators from different regions with different skill sets. And ultimately, each individual could deliver their components, and we would have a trend towards the project delivery. Similarly, on the other side of the on the other side of the spectrum is an established team where each team is actually contributing towards somebody else's objectives. And this here, you can see that initially it looks quite confusing, but the structure is each team has their own board or wall. And as you step back, the trends are, in this case, are color oriented. So more green on the board means that we're going in the right direction. But you can see down that some of the data sets actually are complementary. So more green across the board, that's looking at a national level. So even though some of the other teams have got less green on their board, overall, the company leadership's board has got more green on it, which shows the company's moving in the right direction. But some other data sets also correlate. So in this case here, this was for a UK rail firm, and the performance in train reliability actually correlated to a reduction in customer complaints as an organizational objective. So it's important here this is why it's important to have the boards assembled reasonably close together, so that those trends can be visualized. And it also limits the impact of data sharing, where, for example, one of the teams can simply refer to the overall result. And this is very, very good for morale and giving the lower level team members an idea that even though they've had a tough day, that this is actually impacting the organization's objectives. And again, it feeds into that one team mentality. And it doesn't have to be tidy. It just needs to make sense to the team that's that's responding to the data with their actions, but it also needs to be relevant to the people in that organization. Random visitors don't always, they don't need to understand everything that's going on here. They just need to be able to get a sense of the trend. And that's where this transparency comes in. Sometimes there's a tendency to that this information should be secret. Certainly with tech companies, that's true. But certainly in my field, in manufacturing, I've certainly found that this level of transparency is very, very positive when it comes to the customers. So some of the examples that I'll go through later show how those businesses have done that to demonstrate that transparency.
Roy, could I just interrupt you for another time, please? So one of the questions was, I don't think we've got enough time to go through it in massive detail, so you may have to do a very, very quick run through, is just walking through what does each letter in the acronym mean and how to use it. Now, you may want to do this at the end of the meeting just as a summary, or whether you want to do it now.
Okay, so it's essentially, so if I go back to a previous example, and we can just walk that through quickly. Okay. So the first S is safety. So the acronym is safety, quality, costs, delivery, and productivity, or some people also put it as people. But as a minimum, I would say that quality, cost, and delivery is, every business finds that important. But safety, so one organization might view safety as physical health and safety. Another might view that as business risk, and certainly in the project envelope, that is, business risk is important. From a planning and development team, safety would be regulations. So it's these pillars. It's important that they're used rather than in a dogmatic way. They use it as a let's say as a signpost. So safety, find the things that are relevant to your objective. And it just shows that you're considering those risks. But in a people perspective, safety shows the team that the company actually cares about their health and safety, and you're monitoring that for good effect. Quality, that is about the elements of quality that you need to measure to maintain consistency. And again, highlighting what is important to the customer, to the consumer. Costs, that is the elements that impact on costs to the organization. So this could be wasted materials, it could be time wasted, it could be physical costs of a project. And then delivery, this is your time, your time metric. Where did you deliver what you expected on time and to your in the time that you had planned and to the satisfaction of your customer? And then productivity is about the actions. So are the people addressing the actions appropriately? And this is and then measuring that in a way that is within your acceptable limits. So if you see here now, here in this example, they've added a few. So we see safety, quality, delivery, and costs. But here, morale and employee churn was an issue. So they've added morale there, but also they actually had a plant status element. So this is why I say that it's important that you decide the columns that are important to you, and then establish a mechanism that the other columns can actually contribute into that. Now in this instance, you can see that they've decided to use color bars to visualize it. And then in this instance also, there's a minimal Excel spreadsheets. So this is actually individuals writing on the board, because this is a daily activity, and the overall trend, the month-on-month trend, is put up in the spreadsheets. But the important thing here is that the teams or the organization will use terminology that is relevant to them. And the overall aspect of the board should be that it fuels a one team approach. Now, what we're talking about here is effectively a high level board, but it should also encourage smaller team collaboration. And again, here you see that we've got morale, but within the company status, we've also got a link to the amount of churn and recruitment. So the overall trend should be going up with the duration that people stay, and that they don't have to recruit, because that was something that was affecting them. So going back to what I described earlier, is making the Obeya work for your organization. Now, in this instance, this is a food manufacturing site. It's a cold freezer environment, and the work environment was between 1 and 4 degrees. So they decided to have their Obeya in the central corridor, and each team would have their team board going down the corridor, with the head office and the boardroom being at the end. So as you walk down the corridor, that would link into the organizational objectives. But in this particular case, each team was looked after a particular product line. So when customers visited, they would be taken to their product, and that encouraged transparency and a lot of collaboration with that customer. Here's another example of just a small room. So this is where a departmental boss gave up his office to the team, and the relevant people gathered around and had their team meeting. But because that was at a set time, he could make himself scarce, and the team could use that space, because they didn't need to use it all of the time. They just need to come together at a particular moment in time. And this is where that principle of time, team, and task is really important. If other collaborators in the organization know when your time is, then there's very little conflict. The team, you only bring the people together that need to be there, and the tasks, there should always be very clear next steps, and this should be visible, to both the team, but also anybody else who is looking at their team board. The purpose is to systemize engagement. So in that respect, each element within the organization is working in a similar way, but only putting forward information that helps them deliver their task in the best way possible. So hopefully that this gives a flavor for how the Obeya principles can be shared and can be used in an organic way. And when we talk about the small office here, on the likes of Teams, Microsoft Teams, with Teams Whiteboard, that brings the small office onto people's screens. So it can be almost seamlessly adapted to work with tools that we currently have available. But the bottom line is about encouraging interaction. Before I go on to the next part, Vikram, are there any more questions?
There aren't any more questions, but I think at some point would be useful, Roy, is, we've all mentioned the coronavirus a number of times and the impact it's had on all of us, is really addressing the point of, given all of these wonderful tools and techniques, and they're being very, physical in the sense of you have to be physically present. How do we do this in a more hybrid environment going forward? And some tips and tricks to think about, because I don't think we've all resolved or figured out how we're going to do it, but some of the challenges and some of the ideas that you're beginning to see that are going to emerge. But it doesn't have to be. We got one comment to say COVID doesn't change the principles. I don't. Well, I agree with that comment, but I think what it does change is how we work together.
Yeah, I think that's. I think firstly the comment that COVID doesn't change the principles is absolutely correct. What COVID does, what COVID has done, it's raised a question in organizations' mind that we know that we have to work in a different way. So how can we do that? Now the Obeya principle is about centralizing information and facilitating collaborative action. Within the online forum, one thing that is required is a lot more organization of how people interact. It becomes very noisy if people interact in the same way that they do in person. So having a standardized template that people contribute into, and then walking through that information just helps to create structure in the online format. And this rings true in the manufacturing environment, where you have lots of small teams have to interact with their internal partners, but they have a very, very limited time for data sharing and defining the actions that are required. So it's, again, has to be a very, very structured and orchestrated environment. And this is where the Obeya helps as a tool. But understanding that the principle, the underlying principle is that organizations should be prepared to adapt the data sets that are important, and those data sets need to feed into a higher objective, similar to to OKR. And having a template that we can share on a screen, as well as on a physical wall, is how how the Obeya concept can help in the hybrid environment. So it makes little difference between what you see on the screen, and when you do go into the workplace, you will see the same thing in the relevant place where that team will meet up. Hopefully that explains that. And I'll give it my next slide. I'll just give a flavor for how the standardized template has helped with the collaborators of the people that support TPS across the world. So basically, total productivity solutions, we've got we have a network of service providers that feed into to help customers, and the one thing that they all need is the opportunity to focus on those on that customer's needs in a structured way. So a lot of these organizations are geographically separated from each other, and that's how we've used the Obeya principle to bring everybody into a room for a particular project and a particular purpose, so that they can collaborate, and then we'll disperse and actually focus on the delivery aspects of that. And as I said earlier, we're based in the south of the UK, but we have clients and participants across the world. So in the hybrid environment, you know, with most of my clients, I will interact with them online, and at some time across a period of time, actually attend their site. But having that consistency of information is what binds that common purpose and common mindset together. So hopefully that there's given a flavor for how the Obeya principles can be used and adapted over to deliver organizational objectives. And I'll move over to questions and see if I can answer questions that are relevant to you.
We haven't got any more questions at this moment in time, so let me throw in an awkward question, Roy, from my part. Is, have there been examples where you've been trying to implement this and it's just gone horribly wrong? And what do you do about it?
Absolutely. And most of the time, when it's gone horribly wrong, it started at the beginning, and that there's a lack of clarity of what needs to be measured, and trying to measure everything. The second thing is that different teams in different geographies within the same organization might not actually know what the parent organization's objectives are. So they know what their own are, but there's a lack of synergy. This boils down to effectively a leadership objective that everybody is feeding into. It can't be totally organic in the kind of in the Toyota principle way of moving organically. So it starts at the beginning with one trying to measure everything, and then trying to be too organic. Where that has usually fallen down is when teams measuring the same metric decide on either different ways and what the outcome should be. So when we go into a remote environment, it's actually very important to understand what your external and your internal customer are expecting, and tailoring the measurements to that. So it's very, very definitely a case of fewer metrics and more clarity. Is if in those instances, that was the biggest hurdle to to overcome, was actually narrowing that down. The other one was people wanting it to be perfect before they wanted to have a perfect idea before actually starting. And before too long, there's a lack of clarity because they haven't actually made a start and started using the tools. So I always encourage businesses and individuals just to make a start, and you don't have to look at all of them. Just pick the ones that are important. So quality, costs, and people are usually always there. So start with that, and then you can bring in other topics under a column heading that are relevant, because some organizations, they don't feel that they have a safety problem, or from a people perspective, and from an organizational perspective, they don't have a safety problem because of business risk. They're well established.
So that's an interesting point you've raised there, Roy. So an aspect of all of this work is behavioral change. And I'm sure a common challenge everyone faces is that, new joiners, or definitely an organization that's trying to become more effective and efficient, just there are a number of people who just see this as bureaucracy. And how do you get over that kind of mindset?
That's a very, very good question, Vikram. I think that the overcoming opposition to what is always, any meeting is always viewed top and bottom as being counterproductive in some way, or just a bureaucratic process that is making people's life more difficult. And this is where the simplification is so important, and having that overriding objective of the purpose of this is to make your life easier. So I try to drive the Obeya, and I think we've got a few seconds before we cut off. I try to have the principle of the Obeya as a collaborative space where colleagues can support each other and we can help each other overcome our problems. Rather than we're coming to this meeting to talk about the same stuff day in, day out. And that's when, you know, it's seen as a bureaucratic process. If it's actively being changed to what is relevant, and the team can contribute into what is relevant, that's when it really works.
So it's just actually living through a few examples so that people can see it working, and that helps change people's mindsets.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll give a for instance, this US project that I'm working on right now. There's been a huge number of delays, you know, COVID-related delays, and you know, they haven't met their start objective. So the decision was made to cut all of the unnecessary stuff back, and they just had to produce good product. So there's 5 variables, and they actually focused entirely on the quality column, because to them at that moment in time, all the others were largely irrelevant. And that was seen quite positively, that the team saw their manager as saying, well, okay, we're cutting back to only what's necessary, and we'll focus on that until we get it right. They could see that it was adapting and that it was helpful, and therefore they contributed, rather than following a dogmatic format and seeing it as a bureaucratic process.
Okay, that was really interesting, and I know we've got probably a couple of minutes left. The timer seems to have disappeared.
I think that we've got roughly a minute.
So is there any funny story you can tell about your experiences in this area in the last minute?
Well, the suggestion to put the Obeya in the corridor, because the decision had been made that the company had actually built a space for it. And they said, no, everybody's going to troop through to this meeting space, this meeting room, this Obeya. And it was quite plain to see that, you know, it was going to take several minutes each way. And with changing and things like that, it was just seen as a difficulty by the team. And in the end, they just made excuses for why they were late, or, you know, and they blamed the Obeya on the reason for the downturn in productivity. So it moved into the corridor, which was closer to them. And what it actually resulted in was, they said, we have a space for our new sales team, which we hadn't planned for. And then it was the sales team said, well, this is our space. Why do we have to go out into the corridor to present our information? Because that had become the de facto Obeya and delivery space. So yeah, this was a forward-looking organization that had prepared a room in a to follow the principles, but it just didn't seem to work for whatever reason.